A voicemail Thomas meant to return, but didn't, for almost 18 years. Some friendships do not end with an argument. They end with a message we meant to answer later. Then a week passes, then a month, and years later, we hear an old voicemail from someone we once knew by heart. And all they said was, "Call me when you get a chance. Hello, my friend. Thank you for coming back and sitting with me today." I don't know if you have ever had a friend like this. Someone who knew how you liked your coffee. Someone who could tell when you were pretending to be fine. Someone who sat with you during the years when neither of you had very much except time. A friend who appeared so naturally in your life that you assumed they would always be there. Then life got bigger. Work, marriage, children, moving houses, busy weekends, messages read, but not answered right away. No one meant to leave. No one said, "We're not friends anymore." Each person simply took another step down their own road. And one day, you look back and realize that someone who once knew you so well has become an old name in your contacts. Today I want to tell you about a man named Thomas Reed and his old friend, Daniel Brooks. They had once been as close as brothers. Then they lost touch for almost 18 years. Not because of anger, not because of betrayal, not because of one terrible thing, only because both of them kept thinking, "I'll call him back later." And sometimes, later is where beautiful things begin to drift away. Thomas Reed was 58 years old. He lived outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with his wife, Karen. Their 2 children were grown and out of the house. One lived in Philadelphia. The other had recently moved to Denver for work. The house had become much quieter than it used to be. No bedroom doors closing upstairs. No sneakers left in the hallway. No rushed dinners, because one child had practice, another had a class, and someone needed to be driven somewhere. Karen called it a new season of life. Thomas knew she was right. But sometimes, on evenings that were too quiet, the house felt a little wider than before. Thomas worked as a warehouse manager for a medical supply company. He was a responsible man, on time for work, careful with emails, mowed the lawn on Saturdays, called his children on Sunday nights, paid the bills before they were due. His life was not something to complain about. But at 58, people sometimes begin to remember the ones who walked with them through the first half of life. Not because the present is bad, but because there are parts of us that only a few people from long ago ever really knew. For Thomas, that person was Daniel Brooks. Daniel had been Thomas's best friend in high school. They met in 10th grade, when both of them were assigned to help build sets for the school play. Thomas was quiet back then, a little serious. Daniel was the opposite, always laughing, always making jokes, always saying the one thing that made people laugh when everyone else felt tense. On their first day backstage, Thomas was trying to nail a board into a wooden frame. When he dropped the hammer on his foot, he bent over, holding in the pain. Daniel looked at him and said, "The good news is, you don't have to act hurt now." That looked real. Thomas laughed, and from that day on, they became friends. After school, they often went to a diner near the high school. Thomas ordered a burger. Daniel ordered grilled cheese, and they shared a plate of fries. They talked about everything: baseball, old cars, teachers they did not like, girls they liked but were too nervous to ask out, what they wanted to do after graduation. Even though neither of them was really sure, Daniel was the first person who knew Thomas was afraid he would never leave their town. Thomas was the first person who knew Daniel made jokes, because things at home were not always as easy as he made them look. They did not talk about those things in a polished way. 16-year-old boys do not usually say, "I am sharing my pain with you." They just sat in the last booth at the diner, looked out at the parking lot, and said awkward things like, "So you ever feel stuck?" Yeah, me too." And for two 16-year-old boys, that was enough. After graduation, Thomas stayed in Pennsylvania. Daniel moved to Ohio for trade school, but they kept in touch, at first through letters, then phone calls, later emails. Whenever Daniel came back to town, they met at the old diner. The place had changed owners, but the last booth was still there. Daniel still ordered grilled cheese. Thomas still ordered a burger. and they still shared fries, even though both of them were now old enough and employed enough to order their own. Daniel used to say, "Some things should never change." Thomas would answer, "Like the fact that you always eat the last fry." Daniel would shrug, "It's tradition," and they would laugh. For years, the friendship stayed. It did not need daily calls. It did not need much explaining, just a random phone call, a Christmas card, a long email on a night when one of them could not sleep, a meal in the old booth whenever Daniel came through town. Then both of them got busier. Thomas married Karen. Daniel married a woman named Lisa. Thomas had his first child. Daniel did too. Work grew heavier. Mortgages, insurance, school schedules, aging parents, long days that kept turning into longer weeks. At first, they tried. A birthday call, a holiday card, a short message that said, "You still alive?" And the answer, unfortunately for you, yes. But the space between calls began to grow. A month, 3 months, half a year, then a year. One time Daniel sent Thomas a message. "Lisa says we should come through Pittsburgh this summer. If we do, you still owe me a plate of fries." Thomas read that message while standing in a hospital parking lot. His mother had fallen and needed a few stitches. He meant to answer later. He truly did. But that night, he came home late. His daughter needed help with homework. Karen needed him to look over an insurance bill. His mother called again to ask about medication. Daniel's message slipped lower on the screen. 1 day passed, then a week. By the time Thomas remembered, he thought, it would be strange to answer now. I'll call him this weekend. But the weekend came, and it was busy. Then another weekend came, and somehow, like many small things in life, that call was never made. Daniel did not send another message right away. Maybe he thought Thomas was busy. Maybe he was busy too. Maybe he also opened his phone, looked at Thomas's name, and thought, I'll call him tomorrow. And just like that, 2 friends who had once known each other better than almost anyone began to disappear from each other's lives. Not with a door slamming, just with a door quietly closing. 18 years passed. It was not that Thomas never thought of Daniel. He did, especially when he drove past the old diner, or heard an old rock song on the radio, or saw someone order grilled cheese, or looked at a plate of fries, and remembered how Daniel always found a way to take the last one. But whenever Daniel came to mind, Thomas would smile a little and let the memory pass. He told himself, I'll call him one day. One day. That phrase can sound like a promise, but sometimes one day is only a chair where we place important things and never come back to pick them up. One afternoon in April, Thomas was cleaning out the garage. Karen had told him it was time to decide. Either keep things properly or let some of it go. In one cardboard box, Thomas found a few old yearbooks, a faded baseball jacket, a box of cassette tapes, an old phone that had been turned off for years, and a photograph from the diner. Thomas picked up the picture. In it, he and Daniel were about 22. They were sitting in the last booth, 2 sodas on the table, a plate of fries between them. Daniel was holding the last fry in the air like a trophy. On the back of the photo, Daniel had written, "Tradition. Don't let me eat fries alone." Thomas laughed. Then the laugh slowed. He stood in the garage for a long time, holding that picture. Karen passed by and saw him standing still. "You okay?" Thomas nodded. "I just found a picture of Daniel." Karen stepped closer. "Daniel Brooks." "Yeah. You haven't mentioned him in a long time." Thomas looked down at the photo. "I haven't talked to him in a long time either." "How long?" Thomas thought about it, and even he was surprised by the answer. "Almost 20 years." Karen's voice softened. 20 years. Thomas nodded. "Nothing happened. We just stopped calling." Karen looked at him for a moment. "Do you still have his number?" Thomas took out his phone, opened his contacts, scrolled down to D. Daniel Brooks was still there. An old phone number, an old email address. Thomas looked at the name. His finger rested on the screen, but he did not call. Karen asked, "What is it?" Thomas let out a breath. "I don't know what to say." Karen said, "Maybe you just start with hello." Thomas smiled faintly. "That sounds easy." It is easy, Karen said. It's just our hearts that make it hard. That evening, Thomas brought the photo into the house and placed it on his desk. Later, he went back to the garage to finish going through the box. The old phone was still sitting there. He plugged it in, not really expecting it to turn on. But after a few minutes, the screen lit up, low battery, a small crack in one corner. An old voicemail icon appeared. Thomas looked at it. Probably nothing important. A few old messages, maybe telemarketers, maybe work calls from years ago. He pressed play. A few advertisements, an old call from the office. Then a voice came through, a little older than the one in Na's memory, but still familiar. Hey Tom, it's Dan. Thomas stood still. Daniel's voice continued. Nothing urgent, just drove past a diner today and thought of you. Lisa says we might come through Pittsburgh this summer. Call me when you get a chance. Okay? No rush. The voicemail ended. The garage was quiet. Thomas was still holding the old phone. No rush. Daniel had said that. No rush. And Thomas had truly not rushed. For almost 18 years, he sat down on a folding chair in the garage. The old photograph was on the cardboard box. Beside him, the old phone was in his hand. In that moment, there was no dramatic event. No one blaming him. No one forcing him to feel regret. Only the voice of an old friend, ordinary and warm, saying, "Call me when you get a chance." And Thomas realized he had let one small chance sit untouched for far too long. Karen came into the garage. What happened? Thomas handed her the phone. Voicemail from Daniel. Karen listened. When the message ended, she did not speak right away. Then she asked, "Do you want to call him?" Thomas looked down at his hands. "I do." "Then call him." He shook his head. "I don't know if that number still works." "Then try." "I don't know if he even wants to hear from me." Karen sat down on the chair beside him. "Thomas." He looked at her. Karen said, "People don't leave voicemails like that unless they want to be called back." Thomas did not answer. He looked at the photograph again, at the words on the back. "Don't let me eat fries alone." That night, around 10 o'clock, Thomas sat at his desk. He opened his current phone and typed a message. "Hey Daniel, this is Thomas Reed. I know it's been a long time." He stopped, deleted it, then tried again. "Dan, I found an old photo of us at Miller's Diner today, and an old voicemail from you. Made me think of you. I hope you're doing okay." He stared at the message. Too short, too strange, too late. Then he thought of Daniel's words. "Call me when you get a chance." Thomas pressed send. Afterward, he placed the phone face down on the desk, like a man who had just done something enormous, even though nothing on the outside had changed. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. Half an hour. Nothing. Thomas gave a small laugh at himself. Maybe the number no longer worked. Maybe Daniel did not remember. Maybe Daniel thought it was strange. Maybe it was too late. He was getting ready for bed when the phone buzzed. A new message. "Well, look who finally remembered I exist." Thomas stared at the words, then laughed out loud. Karen called from the living room. He answered. Thomas kept looking at the screen. "Yeah." Another message came in right after. "I still say you owe me fries." Thomas sat down. Something in his chest loosened. Not all of the distance was gone. 18 years could not be erased by 2 text messages, but an old door had opened a little, and from the other side, his old friend still knew how to make a joke. Thomas replied, "I found proof you stole the last one." Daniel wrote back, "Not stole. Preserved tradition." Thomas laughed for a long time. That night, the two of them messaged back and forth for almost an hour. Not deeply at first, not with big questions, only small ones. "Do you still in Ohio? How's Lisa? How old are your kids now? Do you remember Mr. Harris? Is the old diner still open?" Ordinary questions, but to Thomas, they felt like the first steps back onto a road that had grown over with grass. 2 weeks later, Daniel called. Thomas was mowing the backyard. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked at the screen. Daniel Brooks. This time, he did not leave it for later. He turned off the mower and answered. "You picked an important time to call." Daniel said, "Mowing the lawn. Family landscape management." Daniel laughed. That laugh made Thomas stand still. It was older, a little rougher, but it was still Daniel, still carrying something that brought a part of Thomas's youth back to him. At first, they spoke like two people finding their way through an old hallway. Carefully, with just enough humor, not too deep too fast. But after a while, the awkwardness began to loosen. Daniel told him he had left the printing shop after the company shut down. Now he worked part-time at a hardware store. Lisa was doing all right, though her back bothered her more than it used to. Their oldest son had moved to Texas. Their youngest daughter had 2 little kids. Thomas told him about Karen, about his children, about work, about how quiet the house had become since the kids moved out. Daniel said, "Funny, isn't it? When we were young, all we wanted was a quiet house. Now it's too quiet, and it feels strange." Thomas said, "Yeah, back then, we didn't know we were living inside. Beautiful noise." Both men were quiet for a moment. Then Daniel said, "I thought about calling you a lot of times." Thomas looked down at the grass. "Me too. Don't know why I didn't." "Yeah, probably because I'm stupid." Thomas laughed softly. "Probably because we became adults." Daniel sighed. "Same thing almost." That made them both laugh. But after the laughter, Thomas felt something still sitting between them. He said, "Dan." "Yeah?" "I'm sorry I disappeared." The other end of the line went quiet. Thomas continued, "It wasn't because I didn't think about you. I did. A lot. I just kept thinking I'd call later." And then later turned into years. Daniel did not answer right away. Then he said, "I disappeared too. I know, but I still wanted to say it." Daniel let out a breath. "Thank you." Thomas heard something in his friend's voice soften. After a moment, Daniel said, "One time Lisa asked me why I didn't call Thomas. I told her you were probably busy. Then I didn't call either." Thomas leaned against the fence. "Isn't that something? 2 old men sitting around thinking the other one was busy." Daniel laughed. "Who are you calling old? You? You're 3 months older than me. Those 3 months matter." They laughed again, like they used to. Not exactly the same, but close enough. Before they hung up, Daniel said, "If I come through Pittsburgh this summer, is that diner still there?" Thomas said, "It's there. Different name now. But it's there." "Do they still have fries?" "Of course." Daniel said, "Then you still owe me." Thomas smiled. "All right, I'll pay." When the call ended, Thomas did not only feel happy, he felt sorry. Not the kind of sorrow that pulls a person under. The kind that reminds you to take better care of what is still left. In June, Daniel drove to Pittsburgh. Thomas arrived at the diner 15 minutes early. The place had changed a lot. A new sign, new upholstery on the booths, a modern register by the counter, a few old photographs still hanging on the wall. The last booth was still there. Thomas stood looking at it for a moment. Then he sat down. He felt nervous in a way that almost made him laugh. Seeing an old friend after nearly 20 years is not the same as stepping back into the exact place where you left off. You cannot step over 18 years like stepping over a puddle. Both people have grown older. Both have lost a few things. Both have become different versions of themselves. And each one is quietly hoping the other still recognizes him. The door opened. Daniel walked in. His hair was much grayer than Thomas remembered. His shoulders were a little rounder. His belly was a little bigger, but the smile was the same. Daniel looked around, saw Thomas, raised a hand. "You got old." Thomas stood. "So did you." They looked at each other for 1 second. Then they hugged. Not too long, not dramatically, just the hug of 2 men who had missed too many years and did not know where to put all of them. They sat in the last booth. The server handed them menus. Daniel did not open his. "Grilled cheese," Thomas said. "Burger." Then both of them said, "And fries," and laughed. During the meal, they talked about many things. A few old memories, a few friends they had lost touch with, a teacher who had passed away, their parents, their children, the times they had become fathers, and had no idea whether they were doing it right, the hard years they had never told each other about. Daniel said there was a stretch, after losing his job, when he did not want to see anyone. Thomas told him about the day his mother died and how he had stood in the garage for a long time, not knowing who to call. Daniel looked at him. "Why didn't you call me?" Thomas looked down at his coffee. "Oh, we hadn't talked in years by then." Daniel nodded. "Yeah." Then he said, "That stinks." "Yes." Neither of them tried to make the sentence prettier. Some things only need to be named honestly. A little later, Daniel pushed the plate of fries toward the middle of the table. "Eat before I take all of them." Thomas picked one up. "You still haven't matured." Daniel smiled. "Good. I was afraid you had changed." They sat in the diner for nearly 3 hours. Not to make up for 18 years. No one can make up for that kind of time. But maybe they were doing something else. They were placing one small board across an old bridge, not enough to make it exactly what it had been, but enough to step on. When they walked outside, Daniel stood beside his car. "Don't disappear for another 18 years. Thomas said. "You either." Daniel held out his hand. Thomas shook it. Then Daniel pulled him into another hug. This one lasted a little longer. Daniel said quietly, "I missed you, you idiot." Thomas laughed, but his eyes burned a little. "I missed you too." It was not a perfect sentence, but it was a sentence they could have said a long time ago. And thankfully, they could still say it now. After that, Thomas and Daniel did not become 16-year-old boys again. No one goes back exactly. They still had separate lives, wives, children, grandchildren, jobs, doctors, bills, tired days. But they stopped letting the friendship drift without direction. Once a month, they called. Not every call was deep. Some were only 10 minutes. Daniel complained about his back. Thomas talked about the lawnmower breaking. Daniel told him his granddaughter had learned to say grandpa. Thomas said Karen was making him schedule a physical. Sometimes they watched a baseball game over the phone, each in a different state, commenting like two cranky old men. Daniel said, "Players today don't know how to bunt." Thomas answered, "You sound like your father." Daniel was quiet for 1 second. "Yeah, I know." Then both of them laughed. One fall evening, Thomas received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a copy of the old diner photo. Daniel had circled the last fry in his own hand. On the back he had written, "Proof that tradition survived." Thomas pinned the photo to the small board in his garage, beside a calendar and a few bills. Every time he walked by, he saw the 2 young men in the picture, and he thought of the 2 older men, now trying to keep what could still be kept. One day, Thomas texted Daniel, "Lunch next month, same booth." Daniel replied, "Give me a date." "I'm done with someday." Thomas looked at the message and smiled. He opened his calendar, picked a Saturday, sent it. Daniel replied, "Good. Don't be late." Thomas put the phone down. There was a quiet steadiness in him. Not because everything had been repaired, not because 18 years had disappeared, but because some friendships, even when they have been left untouched for a long time, can still be picked up again if both people are gentle enough to bend down. You know, I think many friendships in life do not end because of one big thing. They do not break. They do not burn down. They do not disappear after a terrible argument. They are simply set down. An unanswered message, a voicemail we meant to return, a plan to get together when things slow down, a thought that the other person is probably fine. Then, life keeps moving. And by the time we look back, years have passed. What moves me about Thomas and Daniel's story is that no one needed to win. No one needed to prove who was wrong. No one said, "Why didn't you call me?" They were simply honest enough to say, "I thought about you. I'm sorry I disappeared." Me too. Maybe with old relationships, we are afraid to reach out because we think it is too late. Too many years. Too many things unsaid. Too much space between 2 people. But sometimes, an old door does not need to be opened with a long speech. Only a small message. "I found an old photo today. It made me think of you." Or, "I heard your old voicemail." Or simply, "I hope you're doing okay." Not every friendship can return. Some people have gone too far. Some lives have taken different roads. Some doors, when we knock again, may no longer open. But sometimes, What we need is not to go back to exactly what it was. Sometimes, we only need to give something that was once beautiful a chance to live again, in a new way, slower, less demanding, but real. If today's story made you think of an old friend, someone you were once close to, someone you have been meaning to call for a long time, I hope you hold that feeling gently, not as blame, not as heavy regret. Life carries us. Everyone has busy seasons. Everyone has messages they meant to answer later. Everyone has calls they thought they would make on the weekend. But if someone's name just rose quietly in your heart, maybe today can begin very small. You do not need to explain everything. You do not need to cover 18 years in one message. You do not need to make the first sentence perfect. You can simply say, I thought of you today, or it's been a long time, or I hope you're doing okay. Sometimes, a friendship does not need to be rescued by something grand. It only needs one person brave enough to knock first. Thank you for sitting with me today. I truly appreciate it. I wish peace for you and for the people you have loved across the years. Until our next story, take good care of yourself. And if there is an old friend still resting somewhere in your memory, maybe today is a good day to say, hey, I was just thinking about you. This is Companion, stories that remind us what truly matters.